So best product, best distribution, best price. I mean, long term, we can yell all we want, but there are still the obvious choice for any mobile game developer. This week's podcast is brought to you by App Growth Summit. Join hundreds of app experts from major brands, apps, and games in Austin, Texas on November 15th. Enjoy live local bands, Texas BBQ, and best-in-class networking, all at a breathtaking campground setting. Plus, dive into must-see content for covering the latest growth strategies from top brands and app companies. Request your invite today at appgrowthsummit.com. Welcome to the Games Growth Update, your weekly top news, trends, and insights for the games growth industry, researched and brought to you by Upptic. Learn how our team and technology drive millions of people to the world's best games at Upptic.com. My name is Xander Agosta, Director of Marketing here at Upptic.
And I am Warren Woodward, co-founder of Upptic. Xander, what are we doing here? This feels different. Something's different.
It is. The only constant in the Upptic podcast is change.
Yes. I mean, it's been a little bit since we've done news, and a lot's gone on, man. Where do we start?
Yeah, so I mean, just to address the elephant in the room, we basically took close to a year off from doing news-focused articles, and we really want to do a deep dive on industry experts, and that's really what we did over the last year or so. And don't worry, if you really appreciate all the conversations we've been having with industry experts, that's not going away. We'll still be doing it a little bit more sparingly, but one of the things that we got feedback from the community is that people really, really appreciated the news component of the podcast, and so we're going to do another sprint of doing weekly news updates with insights and analysis by yours truly as well as Warren, and excited to bring that to you.
Yeah, and we hope we have some unique perspective to bring. Obviously, there's a lot of places to get games industry news, but we hope that we bring some value by being a team like in the trenches, doing the work, driving players to these games every day, kind of at the nexus of the marketing industry and the games industry. That's that source of bringing players to the games around the world, and there's a lot of moving parts to that. So hopefully we can bring what you need to know about those moving parts, and let us know what you think about this format.
Yeah, and one thing to note, these are going to be shorter episodes than some of our longer hour-long interviews and stuff. We really want to focus on what's the most important every week, and so that's really what we're going to be focusing on. To start, we'll be doing 3 topics and articles a week and give you our insights.
Where should we start, Xander? I mean, there has been so much big news the last couple of months.
Yeah, there's a lot, and once we get into a weekly flow, I think this could be easier to have more concise topics to cover, but because we haven't done this for about, call it almost a year, there's quite a bit of ground to cover. And so we'll start with a few and see how it goes. I think one of the biggest things, we have a couple topics today. 2 of them are focused on M&A. And we're going to start with one that's been going on for quite some time, which is Microsoft finally closing on Activision Blizzard. So as a little bit of way of background, Microsoft closed its acquisition on Activision Blizzard, and the deal is worth $68 billion and took over 18 months to complete. This is the largest acquisition in gaming history. Fun fact, huh? Microsoft had to overcome a bunch of different regulatory hurdles in a bunch of different jurisdictions. If you followed the news at all, you probably heard about this a bit. And they did eventually manage to get it through, but they did also have to offer some concessions. They offered 10-year license to Sony and Nintendo for Call of Duty, as well as they actually had to sell the Activision Blizzard cloud gaming rights to Ubisoft, it's a little bit of a strange component, but the European regulators specifically were worried about their domination in the cloud gaming segment, and so this was a concession they made. Yeah, that's sort of like the big background on what happened there. I got a lot of thoughts about why this is important, but Warren, do you have any initial takes here?
I mean, I think we're going to be feeling the repercussions of this for years. It feels like we're kind of in the honeymoon phase of this part of the deal, where I think all parties involved want to show the good and the value that it's going to be bringing gamers. And the thing that I think about first and foremost is just the growing power of Microsoft Game Pass. Like that thing is becoming such a beast with the access now to potentially having built-in access to Blizzard titles, all the other amazing IP and now owned studios that they have. It really puts, PlayStation in particular, in a difficult position of bringing an equivalent value prop. But this is like the tip of the iceberg. There's so many aspects to this deal. What's top of mind for you, Xander?
Yeah, well, I think the big elephant in the room is Games Pass, and that's something that I'm not an Xbox owner, so I'm a little bit less familiar with it, but I've talked to a lot of folks about this, and I didn't realize this. I looked it up recently. Games Pass alone is worth $4 billion a year, about 15% of Xbox revenue, which is immense. I had no freaking idea how huge of a business unit this already is. The only reason it's not a huge focus and segment of the business is because it's part of Microsoft, which is just such a massive conglomerate, one of the top 10 most valuable companies on the earth.
Yeah, I mean, I can say for me and my partner, like it's the bulk of our gaming spend is just like Game Pass membership and just like download this amazing, and every year it gets better and better. And I just like my nephew, he's getting his first console right now. And so he called me, he's like 11 years old. He had all these questions. I was telling him about Game Pass and he's like, wait, so I can just like pay $20 a month and I can download as many games as I want for free. It was kind of blowing his mind, right, having not a point of reference to that. So yeah, it really upsets a lot of the other business models for gaming right now on PC and console.
As someone who is a fan of game development and the game industry writ large, it's something that I actually kind of worry about quite a bit. I mean, the most obvious comp is Netflix and what Netflix did to the movie industry, where it slowly just ate up everything, pushed down the value and power of the content creators, and moved the value towards the power of the aggregators, which is a incredibly important value prop for consumers. And that's why it does so well, because $20 a month or $10 a month, is it?
It depends on the package you buy, but yeah, roughly.
Okay, anyway, for a very nominal monthly fee, you get access to what were traditionally $60, now sometimes $70 games, and you get access to a huge catalog of them. And so, I still am fairly concerned about what this means for the game industry over a long period of time. I think obviously the value prop to consumers is super, super, super high, and it's kind of hard to argue with that. But it'll be very interesting to see how this sort of develops over the coming years and decades, because it's going to be that long. That's the timeline they're working on.
Yeah, my slight bent to optimism here. Like normally I would be against this level of consolidation, but I know, Xander, I've talked a little bit about of the FANG companies, the largest tech companies. Like Microsoft is one that tends to look at more lifetime value extraction from its customer base rather than short-term value extraction. And while both are kind of icky concepts to think about, I think we've seen historically Microsoft is willing to make more long-term investments in their technology and what they offer their customers just to bring them further into the fold. Rather, how much juice can we squeeze from them this quarter, which is the operating means that we see many smaller and medium-sized businesses have to operate from.
Yeah, and it's the advantage of being one of the largest companies on earth. You have the war chest and the desire to invest over the very, very long term. And, we talk about this later, but I don't see the Microsoft focus on gaming going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, I don't have any inside information there, but it seems like people are like, oh, the Xbox unit is not doing very well. Like, when are they going to shutter Xbox, or, when are they going to get out of the gaming industry? There's no chance. Like, this is a huge vertical and a huge strategic imperative for them going forward. Any final thoughts here, or do you want to move on to our next topic?
Let's do it. I mean, I think this next topic is pretty intertwined. So
it is.
Next, we wanted to take the temperature of gaming M&A in general. I mean, this deal, as Xander said, has been going on for 18 months. But what's going on right now? So there was a really interesting report that came out last week called the Drake Star Report, and it was about the overall state of gaming M&A. So just like a few high-level takeaways, and then for those watching the video version, we'll share a couple of views from the report. So in Q3 2023, gaming companies announced 33 M&A transactions worth roughly $5 billion, according to Drake Star's latest report. While announced deal value is up compared to recent quarters, the quarter had the lowest number of transactions since Q1 2021. Compared to the same quarter of last year, the number of announced deals fell 60%. And the largest number of deals were in PC and console. And then notably, by deal volume, Tencent led the pack by the total number of deals, but by the actual amount of investment, the Savvy Games Group led the pack. So the IPO market is really dried up right now. And that's also leading to what we're seeing is a lot more like small checks to very early stage companies where investors are looking at like more long-term. Can I make several small bets in early stage companies now, since there's not going to be opportunities to exit anytime soon? So I will screen share for a second and we'll take a look at a couple of the views that I thought were interesting in this report. So first, and I'll try to describe this for those listening on audio. The first view is number of deals by segment and region. And the interesting thing here is we saw that, this is almost maybe 40% of the deals. 13 out of the 33 deals were on PC and console, followed by mobile, then platform and tools, and then smaller amounts in esports, blockchain, and others. And then by region, what we saw was a pretty even split between North America, Europe, and Asia. Then over here on the right, we see just a visualization by deal value and deal count, reflecting what we talked about earlier. The interesting thing here is the trend, which really goes down into the right with a big spike to where the quarter that the Q1 2022, when the Activision Microsoft deal happened and when the Zynga deal happened. But it's kind of a scary trend. I mean, we see that with a peak in Q1 2021, We're down 2/3 with this most recent quarter. So I thought these views were interesting from the Drake Star report. And then here's another visualization just showing the number and value of deals. And the kind of scary thing is you can kind of count on a few hands the number of deals. You know, it used to be the last era of the news show we were doing every week. Xander, I feel like we're covering deals, and it's like, this is it. It's just a handful. So we see reflected here again, Tencent had the highest volume of deals. It was 5 deals totaling total value of 45 million, which is actually, it shows that it's more smaller investments. And then the Savvy Gaming Group, the Saudi fund, 4.9 billion. And that was 3 major deals, with Scopely being the bulk of it. Xander, I know you follow the financial sector of gaming pretty closely. What's your take on the cool-off we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're, I think, just in a late stage of the cycle, right, where you basically have a lot of early investment, a lot of hype, overinvestment, massive growth over the last 10 years. I mean, and then we're at the late stage of mobile cycle. A lot of these companies are unprofitable. They're bursting. Consolidation is occurring. And we're seeing the reinvestment in the next generation. And, this is a pretty typical business cycle. It's sobering, though. We work with a lot of folks. You don't, like we always like to talk about, people don't call us when things are going well. And we talk to a lot of the folks who are struggling right now. And while it's good for the Upptic business, it is, sobering for a lot of people who are make their livelihood in the games industry.
Yeah.
I'm, cautiously optimistic. I think I'd say we're sort of towards, I want to say the back end, because I don't really know how long this is going to drag on for, but it seems like there are, on a fairly consistent basis, there are new companies that are being invested in, even though it's not quite the velocity of last year. There are, if you have a pedigree and the track record, it seems like you can easily raise $15 to $30 million and for an early stage fund. And even though deal size and deal volume is down overall, it does seem that there are still a growing number of people who are getting funding, and we'll see this next wave.
Yeah, I feel like mobile is one of the sectors where I've really seen it slow down. Just the number of new notable launches. Interestingly, there's been a couple recently of big games going to soft launch with the new Blizzard Warcraft mobile game and the new.
I just got the push notification saying your pre-install is loaded, and I haven't played it yet, but I'm gonna.
We got to make a short podcast then. But yeah, just a few thoughts on my end is, this is one more headwind in shipping new games. And I feel like we're seeing investment near where we've seen buzz and love for games this year. Like it's been actually kind of a banner year for games, but it's really been more on the PC and console side. I think the universally loved games like Baldur's Gate this year and Bunk Update is pretty beloved as well. So I think games are alive as well. We're just seeing like the trends and money, flow from one sector to another. But yeah, mobile and Web3. Go ahead.
Do we need to hammer on why mobile is dying? Anyone?
Well, it's worth touching on. We talk about these trends all the time, but the part of it is, UA as traditional user acquisition as something that like every company could do is really broken down, and there's more like a minority of teams that have been able to break through that noise. But another thing is just sort of as the sector matured, realizing that a lot of these business models weren't really sustainable. Gaming top line growth through traditional user acquisition, but there's no kind of underlying profitable long-term business there. And a lot of unhealthy habits, just geared towards exits for this business. And when those exits aren't readily available, what we're finding talking to particularly mobile free-to-play developers is it's like, hunker down, conserve money. How can we like measure this and make sure that every dollar we spend, we're getting a return on? The period of just like top line growth and advertising recklessness is well behind us. And I think that's not changing anytime soon. What do you think about the Savvy Games Group as like such an outlier in investment right now? And it's not just in gaming, right? You see it in electric vehicles.
Savvy Gaming is their games imprint, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. That for the Saudi PIF fund, right?
Yeah. Well, with the risk of diving into geopolitical tensions, so I think Savvy Games Group is actually fascinating. I was very, very, very skeptical of it when they first launched. They have unlimited money. And if we just take a step back, they're sitting on a gusher of oil, printing billions and billions of dollars a year. They understand that in the next, 25 years, oil is going to be a depreciating asset. People are investing severely in electrical, and they want to basically diversify their economy away from oil. And they're incredibly aggressive and have the pocketbook to do this. And so I think Savvy's Games Group, if anyone's curious about this, there's a Novik podcast that came out, I think last week, with one of the co-CEOs of Scopely, and he talks about their strategy a lot, and it's really, really interesting. So you should check them out. He basically says their goal at the Savvy Games Group is to be the biggest games company in the world. and they're thinking in not months, not quarters, decades, and they have the money to do it. And I think that that's something that anyone in the industry should keep an eye on, because with a gusher of money that big, I think you really have to take them seriously when they say that.
Yeah, I think it's more likely that does happen than doesn't happen, honestly, with their positioning. I think clearly a lot of these bets are going to be overpriced and not pan out. But in this macro environment, being one of the only ones still standing with huge bags of cash that can have their pick of the top tier investments, some of these are going to be breakthroughs for them. And yeah, I think we're not going to see Savvy Games Group going anywhere as far as like a major force in gaming. I think it's only going to increase in coming years.
And also, I mean, like 4.9 billion, I haven't seen the Scopely's metrics. It's a lot of money. I have no idea if that's fair market value. But then right off the back of that, they have Monopoly Go and crushed it. And they're like the #1 mobile game on the App Store now. And it's like, I mean, you see most acquisitions go the way of the dodo. And like these guys had a grand slam right out the bat. So I'm like, okay, maybe we got to be paying a little bit more attention to this than I thought after writing them off initially. So yeah, I mean, congrats for them. I mean, it seems like it's going well, and they should be an Upptic client.
All right. So I think we have one other big story that we wanted to check in on. It's not news, but more taking the temperature of a story that's affecting a lot of the industry. So Xander, why don't you take us to our last story?
Yeah, I'm sure people are sick of hearing about this, but we were silent the entire last couple of months on this, and I've had a built-up take that's been like 8 weeks in the coming, so I apologize to everyone for listening. But the last piece that we want to talk about is just the Unity price change, and I'll give some background and talk about why I think it's important, because, I think this is one of the companies I follow most closely. For some background, September 12th, Unity announced a price change in the pricing policy, which was applied retroactively to all games built in the Unity engine. They provided an option for either a small runtime fee ranging from 20 cents to 1 cent, depending on scale, or a 5% revenue share after $1 million threshold. We saw a huge amount of pushback from game companies all around the world. I think the closest thing I can possibly think about was ATT when Apple announced App Tracking Transparency, but I even think that was not really on the scale of game developers' pushback that we saw with Unity. Twitter exploded. Game News Insights were all just decrying how these were like the evil empire.
Yeah, like pushback, just putting it lightly. There was like literal death threats for people at the Unity office. So like this was like unprecedented, I think, the amount of unified knives that came out for Unity during this period.
And so we'll talk about what we think went wrong, but just to sort of close the loop on what happened, they basically rolled back their policies 10 days later. Well, partially rolled back their policies. The thresholds for the runtime fees were increased. They decreased the revenue split option to 2.5 instead of 5, and they changed the rule, so it's basically a rolling 12-month window as opposed to a lifetime value of the game, which makes it so that if you're basically historical games aren't going to be charged a lot. It's only if you're still making money that you'll charge, and it also goes into effect for only new games starting next year. So they made a bunch of reasonable concessions, and I actually think where they landed is very, very good for the industry and for them. John Riccitiello, CEO and chairman, has stepped down and been replaced by Jim Whitehurst, who was previously president and CEO of Red Hat, which was acquired by IBM. This is really, really interesting. So Riccitiello was basically the brain power behind creating the Unity entity that we know now. Red Hat is like a really, really sophisticated cloud services provider, which use an open source, basically they turned open source software into a really, really powerful B2B business, and they were acquired by IBM. And they're one of the biggest growth segments for IBM overall, which is really, really interesting. And it makes sense that person is now put in charge of Unity. If you think about it, they're very, very similar business units or businesses overall, in the sense that they're developer focused, they have a heavy community element, and he was able to have a very, very successful exit to a massive company. And so it seems like that might be the right guy for the job here. So just lastly, I'd say that the stock is down really, really badly from when this happened. So it was trading around $38 a share when the announcement made, and it's around $26 a share now as of today, which is about a 30% drop. So I have some thoughts about, why this is important, but Warren, any thoughts?
Ooh, yeah, many. I mean, Unity is so entwined with so many aspects of this ecosystem. I think we don't need to rehash like why these were bad decisions. People have been hearing about that for weeks now, but I do think it's worth calling out. And there was some bias to particular subsets of the gaming industry that would really punish them, both independent developers and developing nations, because of how the pricing was set and the disparity in lifetime value between players of different markets and different genres of games, and kind of being hit with a blunt instrument. So it does seem like this has mostly blown over as far as like the fury, and I think people are starting to do business as usual with Unity again. I am not very familiar with Jim Whitehurst. I'm very curious to see like what this new era of Unity looks like. I mean, I was shocked how abruptly Riccatello stepped down during this.
Yeah, he's the interim CEO. So they're doing a CEO hunt right now, but he seems like a reasonable interim CEO.
Got it. I know, Xander, you had theories that this might be time for M&A to look at Unity, right? Do we want to talk about that?
I have lots of thoughts about Unity. I mean, Unity is still unprofitable, right? And I think it's like a bellwether for the game industry. They're basically the foundational layer of most of these mobile game companies. And I think at the end of the day, they've been subsidizing the game industry and mobile specifically for about 2 decades, right? Or well, gaming in large, but mobile specifically for basically its entire existence. And they were in a cash crunch position, right? Like they basically were not profitable. The market was starting to punish them for not being profitable, and they needed to jack up pricing. Now, I think first and foremost, this was a PR catastrophe, like blunder to the maximum extent. But I do also think that at the back end of this, after they've done the rollbacks, they're still in an incredible competitive position. They have the engine, which is the most widely adopted engine for mobile by far. It's not even close. They have now a 2.5% rev share or a runtime fee, half the price of Epic, their only real competitor in this space. So best product, best distribution, best price. I mean, long term, we can yell all we want, but they are still the obvious choice for any mobile game developer. And
you're calling out mobile, but one of our big themes and theories right now is like the move to everything being cross-platform by default.
Sure.
And I would argue that throw this controversy aside, like Unity is the best one-size-fits-all development platform if you want the maximum install base, maximum platforms that your games can be played on.
Yeah, agreed. And it's hard not to look at this and be like, hey, this is at least partially, it's easy for us to blame Apple for everything, but this is somewhat a function of ATT. Like their legacy ad business got damaged severely by act tracking transparency. And so they had to look elsewhere for money. And I think this is a very reasonable place. The way they did it was wrong, but like asking your developers who you're literally enabling their businesses to exist for a little more share of that revenue is not a crazy thing to do. And you mentioned this, but I think their market cap now is $10 billion. Like for context, Scopely was acquired for half that. This is a game that enables not only Scopely, but all the different games across the globe to work. And so this looks like a good obvious buying target to me. And now it's a question of who can buy this and can get through regulation. But it's not crazy to think I basically had 2 theories. One, AppLovin should try and buy them. I think it's a bit of a stretch. It's like basically the same market cap as AppLovin, and they said no once. And I don't know if they're doing okay. It'd be a riot for AppLovin to get it. But the one that is really, really obvious to me is Microsoft, which if you really think about it, developer-focused company, has a pocketbook, just got a massive games-focused deal approved. I mean, it seems like an obvious place for it to land. And I think there's other places where it could potentially land, but at $10 billion, someone's going to try to snap this up.
And those are couldn't be more different paths if in this fantasy league of who's getting them. Both are great operating companies, but I mean, what I would see is in this hypothetical scenario, if AppLovin were to acquire, just rapidly transforming it into a profit generating business, perhaps at all costs. But I think one way or another, AppLovin would move them to profitability in short order. Whereas as we're alluding to with Microsoft is very willing to have long-term loss-leading businesses within Microsoft to bring more value and more stickiness to their customer base. And so, it's a completely different path, I think, in that scenario. But I do think it makes a lot of sense as a target for either of those parties if they had the means and interest in doing so.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, the one last thing to say here is earnings calls next week, a week from today. So hopefully stay tuned.
Get the popcorn out.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think that's our news for this trial of this new format. Hope you all liked it. Send us your thoughts if you got value from this. Xander, how are you feeling?
Feeling good. Feeling hungry.
Nice. Let's call it. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this week. We're going to be back again next week, and we're going to try to kick this out weekly to keep you up to date with what's going on in the industry. So this is brought to you by our team here at Upptic. Here at Upptic, we build tech and do all the work to make games grow. If you've got a game and you want lots of players for that game in a sustainable, profitable way, we're your folks for that. You can reach us on our website. It's upptic.com, upptic.com.
Talk soon.